Welcome to the Race, Health, and Happiness podcast. It is not enough to just survive these holidays in this racialized world. We're going to learn together to Sur-THRIVE. I am your host, Dr. O. So this is our special holiday episode, and in the spirit of kind of taking a break and just doing things a little bit differently, today I'm not doing the interviewing. In fact, it's Dr. Karl who is going to be interviewing me. So, hello, Dr. Karl.
Hello, Dr. O. This is very exciting. It's December of 2022. The holidays are fast approaching, and we figured First of all, let's take a little break because we've been working hard all season. Season 3, I think, has been a success by any measure.
Yes, and shout out to our team of students and volunteers, and to our partners. It's just been phenomenal.
Absolutely, and not to mention or not to forget actually that we have a great team of students who've really brought an energy, a passion, a youthfulness to the show, and I think people who've listened probably have picked up on it. And you could really hear that in the JL episode, JL Joseph.
Yes.
And she was fantastic. And at the end of the episode today, we're going to talk a little bit about the future of RHH and how those students are going to be playing a bigger and bigger role. You'll have to stay tuned for that. But for now, we want to make sure that all of you out there are well, are taking advantage of this time of the holidays. I know for some this can be stressful. For some it can be a difficult time to kind of manage the pressures, sometimes economic pressures, sometimes family conflict, sometimes the isolation, more recently the isolation of COVID and other issues. So we wanted to create a little bit of space here for some joy.
Yes, definitely. And that seems weird, trying to create space over the holidays for joy. But the holidays, first of all, we call it the holidays, but of course it's holidays for it's Christian holidays, overlaps somewhat temporarily with Jewish holidays. But for many people, their holidays actually happen at different times of the year, right? They're major religious holidays. Or if you're not religious, then, it's really a bunch of statutory holidays. But nonetheless, it's time that is available for, rest and reflection, but nonetheless can be filled intentionally, especially as BIPOC folks, with joy. And so that's really what I wanted us to think about in the context of, this podcast is about, as I said, not just survival, but Sur-THRIVal. So how are we thriving as much as we can over this period of time? So we're going to, dive into that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, one thing I think that's great about, regardless of how you decide to observe this time of year or not, the opportunity to get together with other people. Now, COVID aside, traditionally, and I know you were telling me a little bit about your childhood and your experience of the holidays and how getting together with people was such an important part, I think, for many people. And oftentimes it's sort of like that food, folks, and fun. You got the
I like that.
The good music. Well, I stole that from McDonald's, actually.
Okay.
But yeah, yes. People getting together, listening to good music, feeling festive, sharing food, sharing, fellowship and companionship with other people. Mm-hmm. But I just want to go over that because it gave me such a warm feeling when you talked about your experience of the holidays as a young person.
Yeah, no. So I was reflecting on it in the context. So, of course, we're talking about joy broadly, right? We kind of really center the BIPOC narrative, but I'm coming at this from my lens as a Black woman, right? And as a Black Canadian. And so, when I think about like Black joy and the things that we do in the context of particularly, so I'm Christian, right? So Christian holidays, and trying to reframe it in a way that includes our representation, right? I don't know if, folks have really had an opportunity to fully reflect on this, but for us as descendants of Africa, whether through the transatlantic slave trade or still back home on the continent, many of us through colonization became Christian. So there's this weird tension where we celebrate a holiday that was really not intended to include us in the way that it was given to us, right? And so whether it's, in our reflections of, Jesus, which for many of us was a blonde and blue-eyed person, which we know is false, or it's Christmas and Santa Claus, it's like we're not represented. But there's so many ways in which Black folks have historically either, on the continent of Africa, at least brought in other historical traditions, or there's just ways that we remix, rejoice, and reframe the holidays. So in my household, so growing up in Montreal, so my mom is Trini and my dad is Nigerian. Two things came to mind about the way we kind of like remix things to rejoice and have representation. So one was my mom was very active in the Nigerian Association in Montreal. And so the women came together and they were just like, we want to do something so the kids feel that, Santa isn't just this character that they see who is basically like a European who's giving them gifts. So they had the idea of having like a Nigerian Santa, like basically a Black Santa, right? And so it was a really fun thing that they thought of. I, really appreciated that because they were kind of being creative in the context in which they were, right? And being intentional about understanding how to bring that joy to children. And, at that time I was a child, but for us to see ourselves represented. So it would take place, there would be like a big Nigerian Christmas dinner in a hall. So it was a big thing for the association. And then partway through, Nigerian Santa would come who like had come from the North Pole but stopped in Lagos and came through. Now we all knew who it was. It was a community member, and I can say his name because we all knew, that it was Dr. Ohiri, right? So it was Dr. Ohiri. He had kids. We all knew it was Dr. Ohiri. I was like 8 or 9. Trust me, we all knew it was him. The Santa suit was not that great, but we loved it, right? We loved it for 2 reasons. It was cool to see a Black Santa. And the second reason was, we were kids, so it was an opportunity to get a gift like 4 days before Christmas or 3 days before Christmas and be able to open it up. And we opened it up in community, right? Like we were all celebrating Christmas. Like there's probably maybe 200 people in the hall. And it was such a beautiful memory. And I think it's those creative ways that people do that are so important. And I know like Black Santa is a thing in the United States. Even in my own neighborhood in East York, the store near me has like a weekend where they have Black Santa, right? Yes. So I think it's important for kids to see that representation. But I think that was such a cool and creative way. The second one was when I was older and my mom just kind of opened up our household to like a number of my friends and our family friends who were not Christian, so, who are Muslim or who were, at home for the holidays, and it wasn't their holiday season. But we would just like all be like eating and having fun, dancing, or, when I got older, playing video games, as youth, and, like Egyptian friends, like friends from different backgrounds, right?
Yes.
And I think that's another way that my family kind of like remixed and rejoiced and reframed the holidays in a way that when I reflect on it now, I really appreciate.
Yes. Well, that reminds me, when you talk about, how people in the African diaspora have found ways to inculcate culture into these sort of traditional Western structures. It reminds me of my Christmas experiences as a kid. So I also grew up in Montreal. A little bit earlier than you, a little bit older.
a little bit.
I can admit that. But interestingly, my Christmas experience with my family really didn't have anything to do with Montreal. What we would do is we would make a pilgrimage. My late mother was from the United States in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So we would drive from Montreal to Pittsburgh in western Pennsylvania.
How long is that?
12 hours on the road.
Oh my gosh. And part of it's in the snow because it's Montreal.
Yeah, because you're going through Buffalo and through that sort of snow belt. So some years it was a little dicey.
Okay, but dedication. All right, continue.
So yes, that whole Christmas story, though, I resonated with the Christmas story and the pilgrimage to Beth, or the journey to Bethlehem. Because every year we would do this journey to Pittsburgh to see Grandma. And, so my grandma was African-American, grew up in the African-American church. Long story short, she had 4 siblings, so big family, lots of cousins there in Pittsburgh. And I just remember some of those sort of African-American traditions, the big get-together with the family, the food, you had your turkey and ham and collard greens and mac and cheese. And, the food was a big part of it. But at the end of the day, it was a great opportunity to see family get together. Christmas Eve, we'd go to church and listen to, the gospel Christmas music. And then, Christmas morning, we'd wake up and open our presents, and Grandma liked to spoil us. So that never hurts either. So that was good. So those are sort of my warm memories of being a younger person. Later on, when I got older, so my dad, who is actually from Congo, and is very much... He was, a Black Studies teacher at school. He's a teacher and educator, and was very interested. He's kind of that kind of academic sort,
so, like us, yeah.
Yes,
you're like that sort. That's like literally who we are. But go on.
But in my experience, though, in talking to friends and family and so on who come from African backgrounds. And when you talk about Kwanzaa, they say, well, what is this thing? It's sort of in their minds. Oftentimes it's this made up thing. And in fact, it is. Yeah. It was made up specifically to help African Americans who had been disconnected from their roots to feel some connection to the motherland, to Africa.
Yeah.
So, to me, that's a positive thing. It may not have that authenticity of coming from a particular region or people or, what have you, but I think it allows a time for reflection. So having said all of that, my dad wasn't so much into the Christmas, but he knew about Kwanzaa and he wanted my sister and I to experience it. So my dad likes to build stuff. He built a little candle holder because in the tradition of Kwanzaa, there are 7 candles. It's 7 nights. It starts on the 26th, the day after Christmas, December 26th, runs to January 1st. Each night you light a candle. So it resembles the tradition, the Jewish tradition of Hanukkah.
Yes.
But in this case, as we lit each candle, each night, there's a different principle of Kwanzaa that in the way we celebrated it, we would all sort of go around the circle and reflect on that principle. So, for example,
cool.
Self-determination is one of them. So on that night, you would talk about, what does that mean to you? What can we do in this year moving forward to exemplify that principle? So again, to me, that was it was about people. It was about that connection. It was about
very cool.
Connecting with culture, but also kind of taking a moment. And maybe for me, the holidays, it's that theme of taking a pause, thinking about who we are, what we want to do, who are we in relation to the people that we love and the people around us.
Yes.
And then moving forward in the new year with this fresh perspective.
No, I love that because, I love it for many reasons. I read about Kwanzaa, as a child, but I have to revisit it again because I really want to dive into those 7 principles, right? But I think, again, as you said, for African Americans that, due to the transatlantic slave trade and the violence, lost, their African traditions connection to that. And then creating a new holiday that has people feel connected, in a Pan-African way, I think is almost finding... So I said, rejoicing and reframing, but it's also a form of resistance. And what that brings to mind for me is a book that I've been, I just finished reading, Living While Black, and it's about finding joy and beauty in Blackness. But in that book, she talks about the author talks about the tension with religions, right? Especially because of colonization, because again, the Bible and religion was used as a way to subdue, African peoples, and I mean, it's very much intentional. So this was the thing. So I was, Karl, I was saying I was trying to fact check because I've come across, again, as a physician, I'm not a historian, I'm not an anthropologist, a lot of comments on the fact that there's no Europeans in the actual Bible, right? If you think about it, many of us know now that Jesus was not European and was not blonde and blue-eyed, but in fact, no major character in the Bible was European.
Right.
Europe is referred to, people travel to Europe in the Bible, there's a mention of it, but the main characters are not. So it was very much intentionally quote unquote sold or forced down the throats of Africans in a way that centered whiteness.
Okay.
Right? So it's not by accident that for a lot of folks who are resisting colonization or, anti-Black racism struggle with the issue around religion. But what in the book Living While Black, what the author reminds us about is that it's also been used as a form of resistance, right? Like, so during the times of slavery, even the Underground Railroad, and even during the civil rights movement, Christianity was also used as a form of like strength and togetherness and a way to rejoice, but also resist. And so, although Kwanzaa is like another step because it's not even about Christianity, it's another form of resistance. It reminds me of kind of like that tradition, right? Of resisting, but rejoicing and reconnecting.
Yes.
Now, the reconnection piece is key for our wellness, right? It's where we come together and find joy in each other's company. And I think many different cultures and religions, even though, here in North America during this, like we said, during this quote unquote holiday time, even if they're not celebrating, I think people do try to, connect in that way.
Yep.
And I think now if we're going to kind of switch to, today's context, right? So we talked about our childhoods and the ways that people do it. But the pandemic, I think regardless of whether you were religious or non-religious or it was your holiday or not your holiday, having time off and having to be in isolation, I think really impacted so many people. We know that, what is the statistic? That loneliness is just as detrimental to your health, I think, is smoking like 15 cigarettes per day, right? As far as the long-term impact, like they've got like, in governments in Europe and other places, they've got like a minister of like looking at issues of loneliness and isolation. We know if you want to punish somebody in a really cruel way in prison, what you do is you put them in isolation, right? Even if they've murdered people, done the most heinous things, you put somebody in isolation and they will crumble. Right. So I think for us all, regardless of, race, religion, or what have you, as human beings, this has been a pretty tough couple of years that we've experienced not being able to connect and rejoice, resist, or whatever, right? Like just being alone.
It's true, yeah. Well, we've been talking to, our team and some of our listeners, and we've heard people talking about that exact thing, that, especially during the times of the pandemic, people have had to become creative in ways of trying to connect or stay connected. Technology has been helpful for those who are, fortunate enough to have access to technology. So we heard people talking about how even this year they're going to be doing Zoom connections. Even within my family, particularly on my mother's side, spread out across the U.S., we can't always get together. So Zoom has become a very good tool for people to have that connection.
You know what? You're reminding me, same thing for our family. Like, although we experienced that, like not being able to all get together, we did Zoom, and it was like fairly international with, folks from Canada, the United States, UK, and in Africa, right? Wow. So that's something that we were never able to do before the pandemic, or never. I guess we were able to do it, but hadn't thought of it really, right? Something that we can hold and keep going forward with it. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. So what kind of ideas do you have in terms of, how can people bridge that gap? Or if you find yourself in a position where you can't celebrate or get together the way you would like to, some ways to, I don't know, find connection, find comfort during this time.
Yeah, no. So, I think there's a number of ways that, people have creative ways that people have done this. So you mentioned the Zoom example, or I know some people have done like drop-offs at folks' house. So because people like to cook up food. Everybody knows I am not a cook, so this does not include me. You definitely don't want a Christmas turkey or something like that from me.
For you, it's like a lump of coal, huh?
Correct. Yes, but people have done that, right? Like there's an elderly person or a senior person, and maybe they don't feel comfortable, going out of the house, or during the pandemic when we really couldn't, then dropping off, you know what I mean? Either it was groceries, or sometimes it was like really nice cooked meals, ring the doorbell and the person picks it up. Now at this point, I think at this point in the pandemic, people are, the restrictions are not at the same level. So I think we're grateful for that. So I think another thing is gratitude, reflecting on what we've been through for the last 2 years and knowing that either now we can reconnect, or we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, that we'll be able to reconnect again in the ways that, we might have taken for granted before.
The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast will be right back after these short messages. Yeah.
The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast is produced with the support of Toronto Metropolitan University. We are proud to be partnered with TMU, a school that has committed itself to addressing its colonial past, doing its anti-racism work, and moving forward with a mandate to provide an equitable and inclusive learning environment.
I hope you're enjoying this episode so far, and there's more to come. This podcast is made possible by our sponsors and partners, but we need your help too. We have set up a Patreon account, and the funds go towards supporting our students, specifically Black journalism students who work very hard on this podcast, and we make it a point to pay them. The link is patreon.com/RaceHealth&Happy, and you can also find it in the show notes. And check us out on Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Our handle is @RaceHealth&Happy.
And now back to the Race, Health, and Happiness podcast.
I love that now we are going to be moving in the direction of hearing more and more from our students. They are creative, they are talented, and just phenomenal. And so into 2023, we're going to be hearing more from them, about issues of COVID-19, of issues of Black mental health, and other things that they think are, important and of priority. So more of hearing about the excellent youth, more of that in RHH Future. So yeah, that'll be fantastic. But I wish everybody beautiful, happy holidays. Again, it's not just about survival, even if you need to survive some of the relatives that you didn't want to talk to, but still find a way for restoration and to thrive. Be well.
Be well. The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast was created by Dr. Onye Norum, and she's our host. The show is produced, edited, and engineered by yours truly, Dr. Karl Kabasele. Our technical producer is Obadiah George. Our showrunner is Cam, and JL Joseph is associate producer. Promotions coordinator is Jordan Gibson. Social media coordinator is Efwa Mfojo. And Javiera Violeta Duran Quieres is our logistics coordinator. Awit Siem is our business manager, and Tamika E. Latibaudiere is our research consultant. Additional support from Latoya Powell, our special production consultant, and additional voice work by Darrell Carpentier. The RHH theme song is composed and performed by Gold Keys, and graphic design is by Veronica Ng. Do you have questions, feedback, ideas to share? We would love to hear from you. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter @RaceHealth&Happy, and check out the show notes for research that was referenced in this episode, as well as other bonus material. Our website is RaceHealth&Happiness.com. Thank you for listening to Race, Health, and Happiness, and please subscribe to us anywhere you get your favorite podcasts. I'm Dr. Karl Kabasele, and we'll talk with you soon.
The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast is brought to you with help from Toronto Metropolitan University and with support from subscribers and listeners like you. Overcome the obstacles of racism while staying happy and healthy. Donate today at patreon.com/RaceHealth&Happy. We are learning together to Sur-THRIVE. Thank you for your support. The Race Health and Happiness podcast is made better by the skills, knowledge, and creative passion of the journalism students who work right here on the show. These students join us from Toronto Metropolitan University. Thank you for the hard work, folks. We appreciate you.